A great set of attendees. Thanks everyone for coming out and joining us. Presenting today on DIY do's and don'ts is going to be Jonathan Hall, our field services manager. Jonathan, you want to take it away?
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. I decided that I would sort of couch this session in a case study that I worked on a few years ago, and it covers a lot of the bases of, well, we tried the best we could to, do things properly and stuck with the do's and avoided the don'ts whenever possible. So this is the building as it appeared when we started on the project. It was bought through the Historic Savannah Foundation revolving fund, and then auctioned off. And the winning bid was not necessarily the highest bid, but a combination of the financial offer, financial ability to take on the project, commitment to follow through on the project, qualifications, and that sort of thing. So we really had our work cut out for us on this one, but it was a building that a lot of us had our eyes on for years. So it's called the P.J. O'Connor House, and it was owned by a relative of Flannery O'Connor. I think it was her cousin, and it was built in 1885, and obviously fell on hard times. So one of the first things we had to deal with was all the wood repair, because this is mostly wood on the exterior. But fortunately, most of the pieces were actually intact. Most of the prior owners had collected pieces as they fell off and saved them. So a lot of them were under the house and in the garage, in varying states of disrepair. So we started, at the chimneys, we had to touch pretty much every square foot of this property. We saved probably 90% of the original material, including the interior. We saved probably at least 90% of the original plaster, all of the original woodwork on the interior. So it's a pretty good case study for this kind of webinar. So our guiding principle are the interior standards for treatment of historic properties. They can be a little dense, but that is kind of the playbook that we try to adhere to. There can be some interpretation, but it gives a very good general guidelines of how you approach these sorts of problems. So it's important to have sort of these guiding principles to help us along on a project like this. So with a lot of the wood, carpentry, windows especially, there's a variety of ways that you can sort of tackle the issues. So I decided to start with traditional repair methods first, and there are, if you're a semi-skilled woodworker, this can be a decades-long pursuit of experimenting with different methods, different traditions of joinery, different species of wood, different problems, but it's probably the most universally admired approach to doing this. And so they're called Dutchman Repairs. Don't ask me where that term came from. And this can be applied to wood or stone or a variety of other materials. When you splice a piece in like this, it's just generally called a Dutchman. And here, I think this is a part of a window or a door where it had some rot issues. And you can see that the carpenter got pretty creative with how they were going to handle this repair. More applications, There's a wide variety of these scarf joints that kind of do the same thing. And with these scarf joints on a heavy timber like this, you can maintain 90 to 95% of the strength of the timber while incorporating a splice like this. So the O'Connor house was a balloon framed late 19th century house. So we did have some opportunity to go under the house in particular to do some of these scarf joints, which was always interesting to try to work under a house and try to get these heavy pieces of wood first out and then get the new pieces back in again. But remarkably, I mean, for the condition of the house as it appeared in that first photo, overall the house was in pretty good condition. And scarf joints, if you look into the history of scarf joints and particularly Japanese joinery, they can be absolutely beautiful pieces of woodworking. Modern repairs that have a wide variety of uses incorporate a lot of epoxies and consolidants, different types of resin to consolidate rotten wood. And they're widely used. Some of the purists still say, you know, don't use them, but personally, I feel that they can be a great way to make durable repairs that are less invasive than some of the alternatives. When you're trying to replace certain elements, you can retain the maximum amount of original material, of original fabric in the building, utilizing newer technologies. A caution with some of the epoxy systems, there's a wide variety of them out there. Some of the epoxy systems can generate a lot of heat as they cure. So if you use them in a confined space, some of them are pourable, and if there's no way for the heat to dissipate, they can actually cause a fire. So it's best to use caution or research the different type of epoxy. Some generate a lot more heat than others, and some are specifically designed. Not all epoxies are created equal. Some are designed specifically for wood repairs. Some are more adhesives and coatings and that kind of thing. So the ones that are designated for wood repair are very much preferred for that purpose. There are some other non-epoxy based consolidants that tend to use different kinds of resins, although those tend to be quite a bit more expensive and a little bit more specialized, and you use them on maybe more delicate features if you had some very decorative elements. But once the epoxies are cured, you can machine them, tool them, paint them, stain them, just like you could a piece of wood. So here are some repairs that have been made with an epoxy fillers and consolidants. And you can see that the maximum amount of material retention can be achieved with these, even more so than with a traditional Dutchman repair. And they're incredibly durable. They will typically outlast the surrounding wood. That being said, it's critical that the wood is dry, and any loose rotten wood is removed before applying the consolidant or the epoxy filler. So you want to make sure that any water infiltration problems are solved beforehand. And sometimes in order to encourage the moisture to dry out, it's important to use a desiccant of some kind, for example, silica gel, which you can order larger quantities on Amazon. You see those little packs that say "do not eat." You can get larger quantities of that on Amazon and make your own "do not eat" packs and use it to draw the moisture out of the wood. And there are a variety of ways to do that. That's just one. So here's kind of the beginning process where the loose wood fibers are removed, and you can see sort of the residue on the painted surface from the consolidant being applied. And the consolidant penetrates into the deteriorated wood fibers and hardens, and sort of glues everything back together before you put the filler in. The filler and the consolidant are chemically identical, so they bond together and they can't be pulled apart. So one of the big advantages of the epoxies over, in years past, a lot of handymen have used Bondo or polyester filler, something like that, to fill little voids like this. And the problem with those kind of fillers is they don't actually bond to the wood. They'll fill in the hole, but they don't bond to the wood. And a few years down the road, the whole repair just comes out again. So once you put the epoxy on there and the consolidant, there's no danger of that happening. It will not come out again. Of course, that does, some of the purists will say, well, that leads to reversibility issues. And of course, we are always mindful of that. And so you don't just, use epoxies in every circumstance, but in many circumstances, they're very appropriate and they're very effective. So here's a window sash. Typically the lower corners of window sashes will rot out where the mortise and tenon come together, and then the sash fails. You can see in the picture on the left, the exposed tenon, and then the initial fill with the epoxy, and then after it's been shaped and sanded, and then it's ready for paint. So this kind of gives you a cross section of the epoxy repair, and they're actually pretty easy to use. They're kind of like Play-Doh. It's very sticky Play-Doh, so you definitely need to wear gloves while you're working with them. But they're usually just mix equal portions of the part A and part B, and apply them, let them dry, and then shape them.
Jonathan, we have a quick question from the audience. What epoxy are you showing right here at this moment?
This one, I'm not sure the exact brand. It looks like it might be Abatron, A-B-A-T-R-O-N. But like I said, there's quite a few on the market. And I'm saying Abatron just based on the color because it's kind of yellowy. And Abatron's widely used. They're based in Milwaukee, and their products are widely used in a lot of different applications and a wide variety of preservation projects.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So as another, so if you look at the entirety of the project, so when you say repair rather than replace, we replaced some elements of some decorative elements of the house that were just gone. They were just missing or too far deteriorated to be repaired. And that included a lot of the corbels. If we went back to that first picture. This house was, it had an integral gutter system. And once the roof started leaking, the water leaked down through the eaves and rotted out the decorative corbels around the eaves of the house. So we had to set up a little wood shop, I think in the kitchen, or what was eventually the kitchen. And we made, I think, something like 20 of those larger corbels, maybe 10 of the medium-sized ones, and 10 or 15 of the smaller ones. And we just, we priced some of these out, and it was astronomically expensive. So instead of buying them ready-made, we bought a used bandsaw and a few other tools, and a good supply of nice cypress wood. And we just made them right there at the house. So it was we probably saved a few $1,000s by doing that. So, and we just used the old ones that were intact to make templates for the new ones that we knew were missing. So it was a fun little part of the project. So we repaired that part of the building instead of just, another approach could have very easily been to just remove all the corbels or not replace the corbels. And in this case, we decided to go ahead and do it, to just replace them all. Or not replace them all, but replace the ones that were missing. And then we repaired the ones that could be repaired. So another aspect of this project was masonry repointing work, rebuilding one of the chimneys. And interestingly, the topic of bad repointing came up earlier today in another meeting. And I found this picture of what it looks like one of the worst repointing jobs I've seen, but there's a lot of them out there, a lot of bad repointing work, a lot of unfortunate masonry that has either been covered or painted or abused or just not handled very respectfully, really. And in the case of the O'Connor house, we were dealing with 19th century lime mortars, so we couldn't just go to Home Depot and buy bags of mortar. We had to get a mortar analysis done and match the mortar that was there. The previous homeowner, thankfully for us, when one of the chimneys had collapsed, he saved the bricks and put them under the house. So we had the bricks, we just didn't have them in the shape of a chimney. So we were able to put the chimney back together again based on historic photos and the materials that we had. Inappropriate mortar problems like you see here, they used what looks like too hard of a mortar for the bricks. And as the bricks were trying to expand and contract, they were not able to move. And the face of the brick sheared off because it would just, it couldn't expand the way it needed to. So this is a good indication of somebody went and bought modern type S mortar to use on a historic building. And as soon as the brick, it heated up and it tried to expand, it couldn't do that because the mortar joints had no give. They just, the relative compressive strength of Portland cement mortars is just off the charts compared to old lime mortars. Old lime mortars can flex and move, and that's where the stresses of the building are supposed to be dissipated in the mortar joints. And then another generally unnecessary something that a lot of people advocate or specify on these projects on historic buildings, and the building that this guy is putting the sealer on does not look particularly historic, but I thought it was a good picture because that's typically how these are sold. They're easy to apply. Anybody can do it, and you know, it makes people feel like they've done something or they're doing something appropriate. But typically, if you've solved other moisture infiltration issues on the building, for example, at the roof or the eaves, or failed mortar joints and that kind of thing, historic masonry doesn't need to be sealed. And once it's sealed, it's generally permanent. They're very difficult to remove. And they, even though they're kind of sold as being this breathable product, they're not really. I mean, they allow a small percentage of the moisture vapor to permeate through them, while larger moisture issues remain trapped on the inside. For example, if you have a rising damp coming from the ground, a moisture masonry sealer is not going to solve that problem. And once the moisture does come up from the ground, it can't get out through the face of the masonry, and then a good freeze thaw cycle, and you've got some pretty serious problems with this historic masonry wall. So they're generally not necessarily or not necessary, and a lot of times can do more damage than they're trying to mitigate. So I decided to put a, you know, this is not from the O'Connor house. This is not us. This is a very meticulously repointed wall. Just to give, I couldn't just leave the horrible repointing in there. I wanted to show a good example too. And another consideration with masonry in particular, but other materials as well. When somebody advocates cleaning them, make sure you know what they're going to use as a cleaner. Some masonry cleaners can be very acidic, and especially in relation to lime mortar joints. An acidic masonry cleaner can just dissolve lime mortar, essentially digests it. So sometimes the cleaners can do more harm than good. They can introduce salts into the masonry that can't get out again. Some cleaners can do irreversible damage. So it's best to use gentlest possible cleaners, low pressure washing. There's no need to approach a historic building with a 3,500 PSI pressure washer. In fact, the Landmark Commission of New York City recommends no more than 300 PSI. And I think Park Service is about the same. The Department of the Interior is about the same, 300 PSI. And in some cases, even less than that. So more is not always better, though we are Americans. So here you can see that the rear of the house, you can see the chimneys above the roof line. You can see the eaves where they've rotted out. You can see one of the missing corbels at the eave about midway in the back. The porches, we're able to save those columns with a combination of Dutchman Repairs and epoxy consolidants. The windows were restored with the exception of the ones that were missing. And we had a few window sashes manufactured locally by a local craftsman. I didn't think this porch was going to be able to be saved when I first got over to the house, but we did not have to remove it. We had a very elaborate system of shoring posts holding it up while we removed the columns, and kept it all intact. So, and we found evidence of a prior staircase that actually was a servant's stair that went down from the second floor through the porch and down to the kitchen. The awning we could not save. I don't think anybody wanted to, although I'm sure in some neighborhoods that would be entirely appropriate, but not in this one. So here's the left-hand photo. It's about 90% complete. We hadn't quite finished with that little front stoop yet. The windows have all been restored. Porches have been restored. Chimneys, roof, masonry. We touched it all. You can see in the photo on the right, the front porch is complete in that one. So there's a new rail, the new sort of little parapet rail on the front porch. And all that was recreated through historic photos and some forensic evidence on the house itself. The roof was the original standing seam metal roof, and we used a fluid applied roofing system. So we patched it as necessary, used the fluid applied roofing system. All the integral gutters are functioning again, and it was sold not too long after we finished it. In fact, I think we had the buyer lined up before it was complete. So it sold for $540,000, I think, on a purchase price of just over $30,000, I think. So a lot of labor went into it, a lot of money went into it, but you know, ultimately, it all worked out, and it was the last unrestored home on that block, and was sort of the last piece of the puzzle for, you know, bringing that neighborhood back from the very disadvantaged neighborhood that it was back in the 90s. So, any questions?
Well, I have one.
Sure.
Thinking about windows. I mean, for a homeowner that's thinking about what to do with their windows, they're often encouraged to replace them with some new ones, either wood or maybe less expensive materials. How can I, as a homeowner, kind of evaluate, you know, the condition of the window and understand whether it's worth fixing or not? And if it is worth fixing, is it something that I can actually do, or should I hire someone?
You can absolutely do that, Allie. It's kind of a one step at a time thing, and just they're not too difficult to remove. If you wanted to get the sashes out of the jambs and frames, they're not all that difficult to remove. And once you do that, you can kind of assess the overall condition of the sashes and figure out exactly what they need. But it's well within the abilities of an average homeowner who has the desire to do it and a little bit of space to do it. You don't need any specialized tools typically. And once you get through the first one, you'll have a pretty good handle on how it's done. So it's really just, the learning curve is a few hours. It's not all that difficult.
And I do believe that we have some resources that we're going to make available for everyone for DIY projects around windows, cleaning the exterior, masonry, and more. So folks that have registered will send you a link to that document. We do have some questions coming from the audience now. I believe this question is specific to this particular house. Did you replace the glass in these windows?
Only where necessary. Where it was broken, we did. If the the original glass was unbroken. We just left it there and worked with it. So we tried to retain as much original material as possible.
Okay, great. And next question is there any special glazing putty that you'll use, or is the stuff from Home Depot okay to use?
There's nothing specifically wrong with the stuff from Home Depot, but there are some other companies that make a little bit more higher end glazing putties. Sarco, SARCO, makes a great glazing compounds. They make a few different varieties depending on what, if, for example, if you have a wooden sash or a metal sash or what your needs are. One general rule in my experience, I mean, some people like them. I don't really like them. The water-based acrylic glazing compounds. I just never had very good luck with them. And if you want to, if you really want to be a purist about it, there are some great linseed oil glazing compounds. There's a company I think they're in New Jersey, but it's actually a Swedish company named Allback. And they do some nice, they do a system of linseed oil putties, linseed oil paints. And it's nice because it's not toxic, and it's nice to work with. And if you wanted to get really into that, you can make your own glazing compound pretty easily with some formulas on the internet with linseed oil and essentially chalk. There's if you just look up make your own glazing compound or something like that, you probably come up with some formulas. And I've heard of people, if they want to paint their sashes a particular color, like on this house, the sashes are kind of red, so you could, you can tint the putties if you want to, if you want them to be red initially, so that your paint cover is a little easier. One caveat with really with all of the putties, it's important to give them proper curing time. Some of the linseed oil glazing compounds can take 30 days before you should paint them. And the Sarco putties, I believe, they require a minimum of 7 days, depending on weather conditions. And if you try to rush that, you will not be happy with the results. So it's best just to let them, once the compound is on the glass, you just let it sit and let it dry for anywhere from 7 to 30 days.
Mm-hmm. So in thinking, just extrapolating a little further on that question around using a Home Depot product versus stepping up to something a little bit better, is the price differential very large? And what are the advantages? Is it like easier application, more even application, better quality, just like more durability? I mean, what do you get for the money?
Sort of all of the above. They're easier to work with. The Sarco putties are, pretty smooth. They're nice to work with. The DAP 33 putties that they have at Home Depot can be really, really stiff, and you almost have to heat them up before you use them, or just knead them in your hands for 15 minutes, which can be tiresome. They have of hard material in them, and so it's there's definitely a difference. And I'm not, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you exactly how much of a price difference there is,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really it's worth it to
okay,
to go the extra mile with that if you're doing all this manual
right.
trying to do this without breaking glass.
An important point. And it's funny, while you were saying that, a member of the audience did share that they believe that Home Depot sells the DAP 33, which has a tendency to be like a rock when it sets, hard to remove later on. So,
Right.
And then before we move on to the next topic area, I'll say another guest did share that they've repaired some of their windows on her house, and it's definitely doable. John Leake has an excellent window book available. Yes, he does. And I've used Sarco, and it is good, she says.
Yes.
So thanks for that comment.
Good.
Sorry, I'm just going to interject real quick because we got a question via email.
Ooh, good.
Cool.
So we got a question. Do the homemade putties with chalk and linseed oil dry faster than Sarco or DAP?
No, in fact, they probably dry slower because the linseed oil itself can take, like one of the things that makes DAP a little bit more difficult to work with, it has a lot of dryers in it. So even sitting there in the can, when you get it off the shelf, it tends to dry itself out. If you're making your own, you probably want to definitely give it the 30 days, unless you, depending on the formula that was found, it could call for some sort of dryer in there that's going to make the linseed oil cure a little faster. I think one of the traditional materials was probably like turpentine or something like that. That will help because the turpentine will evaporate quicker than the linseed oil. It'll help to dry it out faster.
Okay. And turning back to this project that you shared as the case study, we had a question about, did you do any interior work, say, on the plaster walls? Maybe you could talk a little bit about plaster work.
We did a lot of work on the plaster walls. Most of them were actually in pretty decent shape. Some of them had some cracking and stuff like that. So we re-adhered them using a combination of things, really. Some of it we had a plasterer come in, and sort of the big sections that had failed, we had a traditional plasterer come in, and he did a traditional 3-coat plaster. In particular, there was one of the ceilings downstairs in one of the parlors that was damaged to the point where it was just easier to replace it at that point. So he did a traditional 3-coat plaster on that ceiling. In the areas where it could be saved, we used Big Wally, the Plaster Magic, which is a product that's easy to use. There's some instructional videos online. It's acrylic based, so it doesn't require the use of toxic solvents or anything like that. And you essentially just, drill some injection ports, inject the Big Wally, and then secure the plaster back in place with plastic washers and screws. Let everything dry, and then patch as normally with a veneer plaster. And I think there was one room that we used grid wall, which is like it's like a mesh that goes over the entire plaster wall, so it bridges all the cracks and that kind of thing. And it looks similar to like a canvas wall covering. So it has a woven texture, and it secures everything back in place. And then you can either just paint it as is and leave that woven texture, which doesn't look bad. Like I said, it's sort of it looks like traditional canvas wall covering, or you can skim coat over it with veneer plaster to get the smooth plaster look again. And it also is it's kind of like, it's like putting up wallpaper. So it's not all that difficult to use. And it just, like I said, it just, if you have a wall that has a lot of cracks in it, sometimes it's a good product to use, but as with everything else, it has appropriate and inappropriate uses.
So turning to the exterior of the house, a question about cleaning the exterior. What do you recommend for cleaning different materials? So thinking about moss and whatnot growing on clapboards or shingles, and then masonry.
There's some really good enzymatic cleaners that sort of react with biological growth, whether it's mold or moss or whatever it is. And they're not caustic like bleach or something like that, so they don't leave that caustic residue. They're not acids, so it's just an enzyme that you can use it on wood or stone or paint or there's one product called D2, like the letter D and number 2. That's really good. And it's super easy to use, and it has a lingering effect. So it will inhibit growth for probably a year or so. And it's not harmful to plants or pets or children or anything like that. So there's really, I mean, I think at this point there's no need for anything really harsh. I mean, some mild detergents are good. Gentle, low pressure washing, some detergents, and an enzymatic cleaner can do the job better than, in years past, people were using, bleach and very harsh detergents and that kind of thing. And I don't think there's any need for that anymore. I don't think there was ever any need for it.
And
they're quick and they have a dramatic effect, so people really like them.
it's good when you're selling, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about, again, on the exterior, so masonry, you talked a bit about sealing, and it sounds like that's intended to be some sort of vapor barrier, and all I could think of was when you were describing it, it's like that rusty stuff that they used to sell you, put all over your car to prevent it from rust, and it was just like a big scam.
Rusty Jones.
That's it. That's exactly the first truck we ever bought. My husband was talked right on into that, and I was like, anyway, besides the point. But painting masonry, I mean, if it hasn't been painted before, can you paint it? I'm thinking of the fireplace that I may have done that to in my bungalow in Chicago, because it was fire engine red because the guy who built it had a brick factory. If it's been painted before, not painted, interior, exterior, thoughts on that?
I mean, I would say if it hasn't been painted before, then don't do it. But you certainly can. But I would not encourage it.
And why is that? Give me a reason.
You want a reason besides just aesthetics?
Besides aesthetics. And let me tell you, the aesthetics, I wish I had a picture of this I could share with the group. I mean, It was so ugly, and it had really wide mortars, and they were painted black. It was the most heinous thing you've ever seen for the inside of a house.
Well, we'll make a special exception for that. So in that case, there's probably no reason besides aesthetics to do what you did. On the exterior of a building, it probably locks in, if you painted the masonry, it probably locks in moisture more effectively than a sealer would. So you probably wind up having some of those kind of issues about, the moisture within the wall couldn't escape. I mean, the trouble is when you heat or cool the inside and you get, a significant temperature difference between inside and outside, the dew point is inside the wall. So you're going to get moisture in there, and it has to have somewhere to go, whether that's in or out. And if you have a barrier on one side, and then the dew point is still going to be there, it just means the moisture can't migrate the way it naturally would.
So that kind of leads into my thought around vinyl. I mean, a lot of people put vinyl siding on their houses, other siding. I mean, same problem, related problem, moisture inside, right?
Yeah, it can be. And so on this house, we use the siding that needed to be repaired. We got, natural wooden siding. We back primed it, installed it, painted it. We didn't use any hardy board or concrete board or synthetic materials. didn't use vinyl. We didn't, and the house can breathe naturally the way it was designed to. So vinyl can certainly mask a lot of problems so that they go unnoticed for potentially decades, or until they become a structural problem. And a lot of those would be caused by moisture, and it can be the exact same issue. You're kind of buttoning things up too tightly, and especially on these older homes, they were designed to breathe in a particular way, and if you start to disrupt that, you're a lot of times you can run into problems.
Okay. Yeah, and we're welcoming more questions from the audience. I have one now. Do you have any exterior paints that you recommend?
It seems to me like all the manufacturers make really good paint, and they make really bad paint. Benjamin Moore has some really good paints. Sherwin-Williams has some really good paints, but they also have some, sort of the contractor grade, the stuff that's designed to be pumped through a spray gun very quickly, and will look all right for a couple of years. And that being said, paint is ungodly expensive now. A decent quality paint can be $100 a gallon. But as far as like specific brands, like I said, I think they all make good paints and bad paints. So,
are there any key like nomenclature terms, anything to like point to figure it out, or is it literally going to be price? Typically, the higher grade stuff is just going to cost more, and that's what. Or just stay away from the low end.
Yeah, just stay away from the low end stuff. And there's probably even some decent quality mid-grade paints out there that may not have the UV or mildew resistance that some of the higher end paints have. It all basically comes down to lifespan. I think generally speaking, they all bond pretty well. It's just the sun and weather that really does them in. And the higher end paints tend to withstand that for longer periods of time. And really with a paint job, it's all labor, even at $100 a gallon, the labor costs are really what runs the cost of a project up. So you're really better off spending a little more on quality products, because your labor costs will be the same, and you'll have to do it less often.
Yeah, it's a great tip. Any questions from anyone in the audience? You can type it in the chat box, or you could unmute yourself and ask your questions. We'd love to hear from you.
Jonathan, not to harp on the siding piece, but so I'm looking for my first home, and many of the homes I'm looking at have asbestos shingles on them. What do I do about that? Do I leave them? Do I get rid of them?
Don't touch them.
Don't touch them?
Allie just said it perfectly. Don't touch them. The upside of asbestos siding is that it's pretty indestructible. Unless something breaks it, like the kids playing baseball against it or something, it doesn't it doesn't break down. And as soon as you start trying to deal with it, it becomes hazardous. So if it's there and it's intact, just keep a good coat of paint on it and leave it alone.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. It's actually, in some ways it's a, I guess it was the miracle product of the day, and in some ways that's true, because it just lasts indefinitely. If it weren't trying to kill us.
Okay, a question. Repairing old windows. Should the bare wood be primed before using the Sarco-type M on?
Oh, that's a great question. You have to either, I always like using shellac for that. So you put a coat of shellac on the glazing rails before you use the putty. So what that does is it just seals the wood enough that the wood itself doesn't suck the moisture out of the putty too fast, because if it sucks the moisture out too fast, the putty will fail and fall out again. But you can paint it, you can shellac it, you could even use like a linseed oil on it, just to make sure there's plenty of moisture in the wood before you put the putty on there. But that's a critical point, and it's a great question. And the thing I like about shellac paint is it dries almost instantaneously. So you can put the shellac on there. You can just use, some people will get pretty particular about their shellacs, but really for that purpose, you could use, plain old Bullseye clear shellac from Home Depot. It cleans up easy. It's easy to work with. It's all natural, made from insects. So yeah, critical step in a window project. You have to seal the wood before you put the putty on it.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? All right, well, I'm going to take over the screen.
All right.
I think I can. And as we close out, and if you have questions that you didn't get answered today or were too shy to say it out loud, shoot us an email, and we'd love to help you out with your project. We have a couple upcoming events. The next one is going to be Understanding Your Historic Building, Condition Assessments and Inspections. What are the difference between these two activities, and in understanding what's going on with a building and how do you use them to set a roadmap for your future? And I see a question coming in, so I'm excited to take it, but I'll just say then the one after that is our next Rehab Lab, which is Clap for Clapboards, and it's all about clapboards repair and replacement of and the proper materials and how to prime and paint. Come and learn about how to fix the broken ones, squeeze them into your existing set. You can sign up for those on our website and our webinars and educational programs page. And, we send periodic emails as well, so you can keep on the lookout to sign up that way. I'm going to see what that question was. Oh, someone saying thank you. And our executive director did share to the group that touching up paint annually will help your paint coats to last longer as well, which reminds me I need to go hit my nail heads because they're looking bad over on my historic building. So those are our next two programs. And thanks everyone for coming. And if you liked what you saw, feel free, and we encourage you to maybe donate to our cause, and that's on our website as well. But either way, we're really happy to be here and help you with your house. Any closing comments from anyone? Or Jonathan, you want to say anything before we break?
Thank you all for coming, and hope it was helpful and informative, and hope to see you at the next one.
Cool. All right, thanks everybody.